This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. President Biden signed legislation to reauthorize Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, known as FISA. Despite warnings from privacy experts, the bill could greatly expand the ability of the government to conduct warrantless domestic surveillance. The Senate approved the FISA bill Friday in a 60-34 vote. Critics included Democratic Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, who described the bill as, quote, one of the most dramatic and terrifying expansions of government surveillance authority in history.
If you have access to any communications, the government can force you to help it spy. That means anybody with access to a server, a wire, a cable box, a Wi-Fi router, a phone, or a computer. If this provision is enacted, the government can deputize any of these people against their will and force them, in effect, to become what amounts to an agent for Big Brother.
For more, we're joined by James Bamford, longtime investigative journalist who writes about this in his new piece for The Nation, headlined, "The NSA Wants Carte Blanche for Warrantless Surveillance." In 1982, Jim Bamford published The Puzzle Palace, the first book exposing the inner workings of the NSA, much larger than the CIA. Jim Bamford, thanks so much for being with us again. Explain what this FISA law now allows.
Oh, thanks, Amy. Well, it's an enormous expansion of the law. It started out fairly modestly, and now it's expanded enormously. Few people understand how much data really is collected. The NSA has this enormous facility out in Utah, a data center. It's 5 times the size of the U.S. Capitol. And it holds up to a zettabyte or a yottabyte. That's the highest numbers there are in terms of storage of data. Enormous amounts of data. And that's what is going to happen now, is the expansion of the law, the expansion of the collection of data. And a lot of that data will be Americans who have no idea they're being eavesdropped on, because they're going to become repositories in that data center. The way the law works right now is that if you want to eavesdrop on an American in the United States, then you need a warrant. However, if you're calling somebody outside of the United States, another person outside the United States who's not an American citizen, then you have really no rights. They can eavesdrop on that conversation as much as possible. They can collect all those conversations and store them in the Utah data center. And then the FBI will have the opportunity to go in there and search for whatever they want without a warrant. So they could get your email address or your name on Facebook or whatever. They get whatever identifying information they can, and then search that database to see what communications you've had outside the United States. So it's an enormous amount of data that they're collecting, and very few rules in terms of warrant requirements to obtain that data.
Can you talk about the parallels you see between the illegal eavesdropping from the Watergate scandal of the 70s then and the warrantless surveillance permitted under Section 702 that's just been signed off on so it wouldn't lapse?
Well, after Watergate, there was a focus on eavesdropping, but again, that was a very long time ago, and that was when most people communicated on telephones. And there was no data collection, there was no email, so it was microscopic compared to what there is today. The way it works is the NSA has satellites all over outside the Earth, collecting satellite data from digital receivers, from communications devices, from iPhones and so forth. They have taps on undersea cables that come ashore. It's called cable heads, and they have facilities there to pick up the data. All that data funnels into both NSA in Maryland and also in Utah. So there's an enormous collection of data that I don't think people have really a real concept of how much the NSA collects. It's just enormous compared to what it was in the days of Watergate.
Jim Bamford, I wanted to ask you about another new piece you've written for The Nation, headlined How U.S. Intelligence and an American Company Feed Israel's Killing Machine in Gaza. Earlier this month, we spoke to Israeli investigative journalist Yuval Abraham, who first reported this story for Plus 972 in local call, headlined Lavender, the AI machine directing Israel's bombing spree in Gaza. I asked him to describe the program.
After October 7th, the military basically made a decision that all of these tens of thousands of people are now people that could potentially be bombed inside their houses, meaning not only killing them, but everybody who was in the building, the children, the families. And they understood that in order to try to attempt to do that, they are going to have to rely on this AI machine called Lavender with very minimal human supervision.
So if you can talk about this, Jim Bamford, and also talk about Palantir and what it is.
Israel has an equivalent of the NSA. It's called Unit 8200. They're very sophisticated. It's basically the same type of organization as the NSA. And Palantir is one of the companies that's given, it's an American company, it's based in Denver, and it has given an enormous amount of assistance to Unit 8200 in terms of targeting. And that goes to the military. So the military targets civilians, lots of civilians. Most of the people killed were civilians. Women and children have been the people who have been targeted in the occupied territories in Gaza. So the NSA gives Unit 8200 an enormous amount of data from what it collects. When I interviewed Ed Snowden back in Moscow, after he went to Moscow, taking all the data from NSA, he said that was one of the worst offenses he saw when he was at NSA, that they were giving all this American data, Palestinians talking overseas to relatives or friends in Palestine and the occupied territory, and NSA was giving that data to Unit 8200. So you have Unit 8200 that's collecting a lot of data from the United States, from Americans. They're using it for targeting, and Palantir is one of the companies that's enormously sophisticated in terms of targeting. So what the problem is here is that you're getting information from the United States that the Israelis are using to target the civilians in Gaza. And there's been 33,000 killed now. So it's just an enormous problem that the U.S. has got to stop supplying all this data and the targeting materials to Gaza, or rather to the Israelis to target Gaza.
This is Democratic Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin of Illinois speaking against extending the reauthorization of FISA. That's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It would later be signed into law by President Biden.
The bill could allow the government to force ordinary U.S. businesses with access to communications equipment, like a Wi-Fi router, to give the National Security Agency access to their equipment. This would greatly expand the number and types of companies forced to assist the NSA with spying and increase warrantless collection of America's communications. Another provision in the House bill would authorize the use of Section 702 data by immigration authorities. I'm very concerned that that would allow a future administration to target dreamers and other non-citizens who are only applying for travel documents and are subject to extensive background checks in that capacity.
Jim Bamford, you're one of the leading experts on the NSA, on intelligence gathering in this country. Can you respond to Dick Durbin? And, you know, since that time, of course, President Biden has signed 702 into law, this section of the law, so that it wouldn't lapse. Yet, people like Dick Durbin and Republicans in both the Senate and the House, along with progressive Democrats, oppose this in rare unity.
Right, yeah, I've sort of been on this issue for a very long time. Christopher Hitchens and I and a few other people joined a lawsuit back in 2005, led by the ACLU against NSA. We sued NSA saying you shouldn't be able to do this. You shouldn't be able to have these warrantless eavesdropping powers. And we won in the lower court, but then it was appealed by NSA, and they won in the appeals court. The Supreme Court decided not to hear it. So it became law, we lost our lawsuit. But one of the things that we were pointing out then is just as true then as it is now, and that's the fact that among the people that are going to be eavesdropped on by this new section of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is the lawyers and journalists. So the problem here is that I speak to people overseas all the time, and so do most journalists that are covering international issues. And now those communications can be eavesdropped on at any time because you're talking to somebody outside the country. And that's a really big problem if you're promising somebody that you're going to grant them confidentiality, when in reality, the NSA is not only listening to it, but they're tape recording it or recording it, and then storing it for forever. I mean, there's no time limit on it, and the FBI can go through it anytime they want without a warrant. So those are among the problems. The other one is the attorneys. There are a lot of attorneys who speak to clients and witnesses and fellow attorneys overseas, and they'll have no privacy on those communications. So if there's a case against, or there's a defendant who's fighting a court case in the U.S., and the attorney is talking to witnesses in that case overseas, the NSA could be eavesdropping on those communications without a warrant. There's no exception for attorneys or journalists or anybody.
So talk about the forces that want this and those that don't. I mean, it has been extended.
Well, there's always been a group of people that want it because they feel that there's a need after 9/11 for looking for terrorists everywhere. The problem in the past is it hasn't proved that effective in terms of catching terrorists, but it has been very effective on eavesdropping on people's private communications. So you have a group of people that want to demonstrate that they're very adamant that we keep terrorists out of the country, and then they're for the act. And then there's the privacy people who are on the other side, who've been arguing that this is far too much power, and if the U.S. wants to do this, then they should get a warrant. I mean, there was a bill to or an amendment to get a warrant to this, and it was a tie vote. It was only broken by the Speaker of the House, who sided on the favor of the people that wanted the eavesdropping. So it is very divided, and that's one of the key issues: is should there be a warrant requirement to this section of the FISA Act?
And for people who don't understand, and you're the expert on this, what the NSA, the National Security Agency, is, a number of times larger than the CIA.
Well, the NSA is the largest intelligence agency on Earth. I mean, it's just gigantic. It's basically a city. I've been there many times because I've done 3 books on it, several documentaries, and countless articles. So over the years, I've been there numerous times, and it's just an enormous city devoted to eavesdropping. Most of the eavesdropping, obviously, is overseas, but that's the problem. Some of the eavesdropping is done on Americans without a warrant, and that's the major problem. Again, NSA has this capability to not only pick up enormous amounts of communications, but then store them in this enormous data center, which acts basically as an external hard drive for NSA, store it forever. And then the FBI would have the opportunity to go through that without a warrant. So basically what you have is the world's largest intelligence agency devoted to eavesdropping, and this bill allows them to do it without a warrant on Americans who are calling people overseas.
So the bill widens the definition of electronic communications service provider. Explain more how it expands the NSA's power, the largest intelligence gathering agency in the world.
Well, before it was able to get it from Google and other major big tech companies that operate in the United States, and by law they're required to turn this over to the NSA. It expands it by allowing the NSA to also get data from a lot of smaller data centers. The size doesn't matter. They just, if you're collecting data, the NSA will have a right to go in there and ask for that data. So it's an enormous expansion. It seems like every few years, whenever this bill comes up, there's another expansion, and it keeps expanding. And, you know, it's ironic. 40 years ago was the 1984, the year that George Orwell predicted that we would have a surveillance state. And we keep creeping and creeping closer to Orwell's prediction.
James Bamford, you just wrote a piece in The Nation. Its headline, "The Nuclear Explosion That Makes U.S. Aid to Israel Illegal." You talk about a nuclear explosion that occurred in the early morning hours of September 22nd, 1979, that was detected by geophysicists in Antarctica and researchers in Puerto Rico, and how it determined that it was secret nuclear tests by Israel outlined by CIA documents and other sources. Tell us why this is so significant.
Well, it's significant because 2 years before that, in 1977, there was an amendment passed that said that any country that explodes a nuclear weapon that's not a signatory to the Nuclear Weapons Pact, we should ban any kind of military aid and assistance going to that country as a penalty. And again, that was passed in 1977. And the Israelis exploded this nuclear weapon in 1979, so they were in violation of that amendment to the law. So, in order to enforce the law, the U.S. should cut off all the aid to Israel. I mean, was the reason that amendment was put in there, was to get these rogue states, and that's what Israel is considered a rogue state because it has weapons that it never declared. It's exploded a nuclear weapon secretly, and it's never signed these treaties, these nuclear weapons treaties. So it's a rogue pariah state when it comes to nuclear weapons, and the U.S. has the right to enforce the law against Israel. In other words, cut off all military aid. And I suggested that that's what the U.S. should do because of the abuse that the Israelis are putting to all the weapons that we're giving to them. We should be cutting off all these weapons, and this is one way to do it legally without any problem. I mean, that's the law. Cut it off.
You also wrote a piece headlined "How U.S. Intelligence and an American Company Feed Israel's Killing Machine in Gaza." You're talking about the Denver-based company Palantir. Overall, how does the integration of AI technology into military operations challenge traditional notions of accountability and intelligence gathering, Jim?
Well, Palantir is a very powerful company when it comes to targeting. They supply most of the targeting, data assistance, the software and so forth for Ukraine, for example. So now they're also doing it for Israel. And what it does is it basically puts it in the hands of a robot. I mean, that's what AI is. So it takes out of the hands of humans a lot of the judgment, and that creates a lot of problems. There's 10% of the targets that it picks out are errors. That's a lot of people that are killed if it's 10%. And the way some of this targeting is done is once a person is inside a house, that's when they target them. And it kills their entire family, even though they're only after this one person. Some of the AI says that they use says the person is at home now. So that's when the targeting begins. They blast the house, they kill the wife, husband, children, anybody who happens to be in the house. And one person who visited Palantir, I guess it was about a year ago or so in England, they said it just rapidly accelerates the amount of targeting, where it might have taken hours to pick out the right target to make sure that they're right. Now it could be done in virtual seconds, 20 seconds or something like that. So, so there's no human interaction. The machine says, blow this house up, and somebody pushes a button to blow that house up without a lot of human interaction to determine whether that, how many civilians are going to be killed, whether that person is really associated with Hamas, and it just becomes a killing machine. So what I suggested in the article is that in addition to having restrictions on the export of deadly weapons to foreign countries, which we do, because once a country gets them, they could be unaccountable. Also have restrictions on this type of targeting software that's used, because it's the same thing. I mean, the bomb kills you, but also the target that puts you on the kill list makes you dead. So, so both those things play into each other, and you should, the U.S. should consider restricting the sale of these very powerful targeting software systems.
We also talked about this with Yuval Abraham, who exposed both the program Lavender, and he got this from top Israeli intelligence officers who revealed this, and also the program Where's Daddy, which, as you said, very little time in human beings overseeing the targeting. And it specifically looks for men in Gaza who are not at work, but who are at home at night, with the average number of people killed in their families something like 20.
Yeah, and that's murder, as far as I'm concerned, as far as most people, in the civilized world are concerned. If you know you're targeting civilians, and there's no restrictions on that, that's unauthorized killing, that's murder. So, and that's what these systems are able to do. I don't know where the dividing line is with Palantir. They supply targeting equipment. I don't know if they're involved with the systems that were described in the article that you referred to, the Lavender system. But they all come together in the targeting of innocent civilians in Gaza. I mean, you need the targeting software, this very, very sophisticated software, and then you need the people to program it to do these things. So this is a very big problem, and the U.S. doesn't seem to be paying any attention to it whatsoever.
And finally, Jim, the implications that arise from Palantir's AI machines relying on data from the National Security Agency.
Yeah, the other thing that goes into this equation is the fact that a lot of the information that goes into the targeting comes from NSA, comes from the United States. Now, for decades, the U.S. has had this agreement. Edward Snowden, who I interviewed in Moscow soon after he arrived there, after taking enormous amounts of data from the NSA, told me that was one of the worst violations he saw when he was at the agency, was the giving of all that data. A lot of that data was eavesdropping on Palestinians in the United States, talking to Palestinian relatives or friends in the occupied territories in Gaza and so forth, so that once they gave that to the Israelis, they could use that for targeting. It was so bad at one point that even after Snowden left and revealed that a year later, there were, I think, 48 Israelis, military people who were attached to Unit 8200, the Israeli equivalent of NSA, who quit in disgust and went to the press and said, we don't want to do this anymore because it's so invasive in targeting of the Palestinians. So that came from the inside of Unit 8200 to show you how dramatic it was. So the U.S. is supplying a lot of the data, a lot of the software for the targeting comes from Pelletier, and then the NSA is supplying a lot of the information that goes to these data machines, basically. And that's the names of the people, who they are, what their phone numbers are, what their contacts are, and so forth. And the NSA has been doing that for a very long time as part of this agreement. And again, as part of what the documents that Snowden left NSA with, one of them was the actual agreement between the NSA and Unit 8200, between the U.S. and Israel in terms of sharing this data.